ladies and gentlemen. This is Brian Strawser, and welcome to Just Brian. This is the inaugural ship, so we'll see how this goes, but I thought you might want to get to know me first. So we'll start right from the beginning, and that would be in Niagara Falls, New York, on July 6, 1964. I was supposed to be here on July 4th, but I was obstinate even then. Now, I heard stories that I was supposed to be technically born on the Maid of the Mist, which would have been cool because I would have had dual citizenship, but it didn't work out that way. So, there I was. Had I known then what I know now, I would have never come out. I'd have had cable, and I'd have had Domino's every day. And Mom would have had just have to deal with it. So much for my younger brother, too. So I guess we know why that didn't turn out that way. I was trying to think the other day of my first solid memory. And I can honestly tell you that it was about the time I was 4 years old. Maybe I'm just slow with that, too. I don't know. But, I can remember driving around in my mother's 1963 Chevrolet Corvair convertible. And I thought that, as a tiny little munchkin, was the coolest car. It was white, the top went down, and it went back up, which it was even more important back then. But it was bright red vinyl interior. They even had a picture of me standing up in the driver's seat, just holding on to the steering wheel. That was pretty cool. But I remember Bath, New York, and I can vividly remember when my mother was pregnant for my baby brother, because I had to go stay at this lady's house in Campbell, New York, when she delivered. It was winter. It was November of 1968. I think it was the 18th. Sorry, Dana, if I can't remember your birthday, but I remember staying at this old lady, and I didn't like it because she smelled weird. And I guess it was Ben Gay or whatever old ladies wore in the 60s. Sorry, again, but hey, deal with it. Now, there was a lot that I didn't remember they told me about. I remember my mother telling me about this story where I was sitting, I may have been a year old or so, I was sitting in the kitchen, so she tells it, and I was chewing on something, and she looked, and she swore to God it was a mouse. And of course she, mother's being mother, she slapped me right across the face to get that mouse out of my mouth, only to find out that it was a chicken gizzard. So, a chicken gizzard.
Was it any particular reason other than you just wanted to chew on it?
I guess that was it. I mean, sign of things to come. I pretty much should be a carnivore. But, that being said, there were other stories. Apparently, I was good buddies with Amory Houghton, who used to be a New York State senator. I guess I went missing one day. I was about 2.5, 3 years old, and I just went, as they say in Australia, on a walkabout. Mm-hmm. Well, where we lived in Corning, it was off the main street through town, and it was all hill. Anybody who's ever been through Corning, New York, knows that half of it's flat, and the rest of it's like San Francisco, really, a miniature San Francisco. It's all slanted. Well, I think we lived on the first or the second street up, parallel street. Well, I just disappeared. They had the police looking for me all over Corning, New York, and painted posts, and the troopers were looking for me, and they were going to start using the radios and coordinating a search until Mr. Houghton called my parents and said, "I think I know where your son is." Well, they come running up the hill, and there I was in the front yard rolling all over these big dogs that he had. And the dogs and I were having just a fantastic time. So the story goes. Mm-hmm. So, even then I did things my own way. I was kind of a loner. Mm-hmm. That was foreshadowing, too. Mm-hmm. I love to do things by myself. I really didn't like people, I guess. Mm-hmm. So, and the jury's still out on that. But we moved to Bath, like I said. They bought this big Victorian house. I can remember every room to this day. It was a fantastic place to grow up. Excuse me. That's what happens when you drink too much soda. So, we're in Bath. Like I said, my brother came along November 18th, 68. So I had to start sharing attention. I really don't know. I guess I loved my brother. It was this new toy as far as I was concerned. And, so things went on. And everybody has, as far as I'm concerned, unless you just have, just terrible parents or you're terribly abused, a lot of us have the similar childhoods. I did. I had a great childhood.
How old were you when your brother was born?
Oh, I was 4 years and 4 months old.
Okay.
4 years and 4 months.
So it's a decent gap.
Yeah, 50 years ago. Ha, jeez. All right, anyways, enough of that pain. I had to think back, and I realized that this whole loner part played a big part with how I dealt with everybody. I didn't like dealing with other kids. You had to share things. And that necessarily wasn't bad, but then you had to watch them use your toys. And they never used them correctly. So you'd take them back. That wasn't a good start either. And I remember I was kind of a short, fat kid. And I thought back and realized that I was a bullied child. But I let it happen because I just didn't want to fight back for whatever reason. And I didn't come from any tree-hugging family either, My dad's side of the family were known as some pretty rugged people. They didn't take a lot of guff from Chet. So I was kind of the odd man. It is what it is, So you go through your childhood. Things are normal. You learn to avoid people if you're the short, fat kid. We get up around to 1975, I think it was. And I remember joining football. It was the beginning of the Peewee Football League in Bath, New York. And, of course, the Pittsburgh Steelers were all that and then some at the time. And I didn't realize that there was such a team called the Buffalo Bills. I had no idea. I was 10 or 11. I mean, I probably did, but it didn't matter. They sucked. So Terry Bradshaw, I mean, he was it. Old Louisiana Lightning, man. That dude just loved to throw it out there, and I loved that. But even then, I realized I'm not fast. My legs are shorter than my body, so I became the center. Well, you hold the ball. You hold the ball more than anybody else on the team. So here was this little kid, and I was the guard and the center and the defensive guard. And by golly, the Bath Steelers won the Pee Wee Championship. So,
nice. Man,
I had a Terry Bradshaw jersey. My brother had a Lynn Swan jersey. I had the J.C. Penney black and yellow vinyl sleeve jacket. I mean, it was awesome. We thought we had arrived. It was a little later, and if I had to think back, it was June of 1976. That was when my grandfather died. I had no concept of death whatsoever. I just didn't understand. I didn't know what it was. Well, you shoot a deer and you eat it. That was as far as my knowledge of death went. And yes, for all you people that don't like hunting, I like to hunt. I like to fish. So now's your chance to find a new guy. But stick around. I think you'll find it's pretty fun. If nothing else, you'll get a free laugh at me from time to time. So, we buried Grandpa. That was hard. But I remember we cheered up not a month later. It was the bicentennial celebration. We ended up going to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and we watched the reenactment of the Battle of Gettysburg. And I remember Dan Rather. And that's why you should turn your cell phones off. Anyways, I stood right next to Dan Rather. A helicopter had landed so that the CBS crew could come in and film this whole thing. Mm-hmm. And it was awesome. And my mother kept saying, say hello, say hello. So I finally did. And you know what he did? Dude stiffed me. A little 12-year-old kid, and Dan Rather gave me the cold shoulder. And I thought, I'll never watch CBS again. That's okay.
CBS with Dan Rather.
Yeah, he's a miserable old man. Down on his ranch in Texas doing whatever miserable old Texans do. And sorry, Texas, don't get me wrong. I love Texas. I would love to be a Texan someday. If for no other reason they get to wear cool boots and you don't have a state income tax. And when everybody else is eliminating the death penalty, you have a conveyor belt. You're awesome. So, all right, getting a little off track there. So, all right, we spend our nation's birth down in Gettysburg. Have a great time. Funny story is they had this wax museum down there, and this place was wicked ripping awesome. They had guys in there that would stand in period uniforms, dead still. I don't know how they could manage to not show they were breathing, but they could control their breathing to the point that you thought they were a wax mannequin. And this guy was a Union enlisted man next to a display. And my mother is taking a picture next to this wax mannequin. And the dude just played along great. He said something to the effect of, don't touch me. And my mother jumped, and she's only like 5'1", 5'2". She about jumped right out of her shoes, and I think that was the beginning of bladder problems right there. So it was cool. Thanks, Mom, for taking one for the team. So, time moves on. My dad gets a job down in Virginia in construction in Washington, D.C. So I want to say, and I'm a little fuzzy on the exact dates, but January of 77, we moved down to Woodbridge, Virginia, which is just 20-some miles south of D.C. And that was a hard time. And I remember it to be very difficult because that was my first true experience with racial problems. Now, some people might say, well, you're a big white dude. Well, I was just a little short, fat white kid at the time. And I had a problem with a bunch of the black kids. Namely, they wanted to beat the tar out of me because I didn't talk like a Southerner, number one. I was from New York, number two. And I just wasn't one of them. It was rough. It was truly rough. I can remember getting off the bus and learning to run quick once or twice because there was a horde chasing after me. And I thought, what the hell? I didn't call them any of those names that I was always told not to call anybody. Mm-hmm. I didn't look at anybody's sister funny, so I thought, and it was reverse racism. Now I've been told, now that I've spent some time in an institution of higher learning, that it is impossible for black people to be prejudiced because they're still minority. And it's just not possible. Well, I can guarantee you I was on the losing end of that experience for about a solid year. One of the most miserable years of my life.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I think racism is just racism.
Yeah.
Period. Regardless of where it's coming from. It doesn't matter if it's black and white. I mean, that's because of our history. I think that's where the majority of the story and stuff you hear comes from, but conversation for another time.
Yeah, it was rough. But there was some fun times down in Virginia. I got to go to the Smithsonian Institutes, the natural history, the modern history. I saw some amazing things. I got to see the Declaration of Independence and stuff. I loved it. And if you couldn't top that, well, let me tell you about a place called the Chesapeake Bay Seafood House. It doesn't exist anymore. I almost wore black for a week when I found out it went out of business. But the funny thing is about this place, if you went in there and ordered something, let's say, just for the sake of it, the Alaskan king crab legs at the time were the highest priced thing on the menu. You got to eat all the crab legs you could fit into your body. Another nice thing is anything equal price or lower, you got for free, as much as you wanted. That was a challenge. I mean, that was just come and get it. See what you can do. My mother still gets mad, and I'm going to tell this story. Again, sorry, but we used to wrap things up and stick them in her purse because, you can't leave a plate with stuff on it. She swears up and down that I imagined that, but I know that I had clam strips later and hush puppies, and they were good. So, yeah, that, it was fun. Around, I would say the fall of 77, that's when my parents separated. So it went on a few months. We decided that we were going to move back to New York. We still had that house. There was a rental unit, so there was a little income. My mother had gotten into the real estate industry with Century 21, so she did the same thing up in New York when we moved back. And that would have been January of 78. Just right after one of the biggest blizzards that had come through the area. There were snowbanks, I would say 7-8 foot tall. So it was interesting moving everything into this house right after a blizzard. I did hear a lot of colorful words from a lot of guys and some slippage and a few broken things, but, that's life. School went on, life moves on. I was in 7th and I was in 8th grade, 78, 79 school year. I remember the spring is when my grandmother died, paternal grandmother. So now they'd both gone. And I remember we used to be a tight family. Everybody gathered at Grandma's every Sunday. It didn't matter what you were doing, you went there for dinner. And it was 30-some miles away from us. Didn't matter. She was upset. She'd cry if you didn't show up. The day she died, that stopped. It's funny what you remember, but it was something. We will move on a little bit. Around the end of 8th grade, I remember a big fight. One of my older cousins got involved in that. And that's when I started to fight back, defend myself. I'm not sure what triggered that, but I do remember. I had to remember quickly not to throw roundhouse punches because you kind of invited retaliation. So I learned to fight properly. I also learned to fight dirty. I'm not going to lie. I was a dirty fighter. I probably still am if I had been. Now it's a sheer act of desperation. And if it ever came to that, because I'm not in the best of shape. But, yep, that was the time where I started to fight back. And I had a lot of anger build up at that point. I had a list of people I wanted to get even with. And I chipped a few names off that list. But again, life goes on, you just, I don't know. I had to learn not to be so angry, or I had to learn to pick my points. One thing I did, the beginning of the 79-80 year, is I joined the football team. Man, I never knew how out of shape I was, and just a kid, until I went to the summer camps. I ran uphill, I ran downhill, I ran around the hill over and over and over. I also learned that you never drink milk or have a heavy breakfast because it wasn't with me after about 30 minutes. After that, it was water and orange juice or something like that, all protein, no starch, no milk. And I'll tell you a little something about milk. if I could have my own cow and just go suck on the udder, I would, because I love milk that much. But I'm telling you, I think it is a shame. It's a travesty that they make farmers pasteurize the milk all the time. I can remember around this time, I would go to friends' dairy farms and I'd help hay and do things. And there was always, at this one farm, there was always fresh chocolate chips and ice cold milk that had been pulled that morning. I call it pulled, but let's, whatever the terminology. Don't hate me, farmers. All I know is it was good. And I also realized that the farmers' daughters were really good looking at that point. So, but we'll get to that here in a little bit. So I joined the team. Things are going great. One particular practice, I remember the coach was mad at me because I had missed the day before. And, they were just hammering me. Well, I teed up on this one guy on kick returns. We were doing that, practicing punts. This kid named Johnny, I can't remember his last name to save my life, but he lived at a place called Snell Farms in Avoca, New York. Mm-hmm. It was, I think it was part of Family Life Ministries, but don't quote me. They were associated at least, kids that came from bad homes and whatnot, and they did a great job of helping people turn their lives around. Well, Johnny was on the football team, and it was, if you had to look at 15-year-olds, I would have to say it was like looking at a miniature Earl Campbell from the Houston Oilers. Everybody remembers Earl. He was like a Mack truck going up against a bunch of Toyotas trying to stop him. This guy was brutal. And I thought, damn it, Johnny's not getting by me today. I said, I'm getting this guy. And we loved each other. But he tattooed me right in the chest. I tried to tackle him high. And I remember going backwards, like straight through the air, and I reached my arms back, and I felt this snap. And it was my left wrist. Well, it was snapped clean. And, it had dropped down and came back underneath the bone. So it hurt for about 30 seconds. Then I felt nothing. Well, I thought, that's pretty cool. But I you don't know what you don't know. Well, I was in shock. And one kid looked at me and puked. And I thought, what's his problem? I've got the broken arm. He said, you were so pale, we thought you were going to die. And I said, oh. I said, well, I didn't feel any pain. I was good. He said, well, you didn't look good, buddy. I said, well, hey. So I'm doing a little cussing. And I remember Everett Kiff was one of our assistant coaches. Wonderful guy. He was also the swimming coach. He said, hey, watch your mouth. And I'm like, man, I'm thinking you don't even get a little slack when you've got broken bones around here. He had a 1972 Chevy Blazer that had leaf springs all the way around. So they didn't get an ambulance. They loaded me in the passenger seat of Ev's Blazer. And that's when the shock started to wear off a little bit. I swear to God, the guy hit every pothole on Washington Street to turn and go up towards the hospital in Bath. I thought I was going to die. I didn't, obviously. Yeah. And I'm sitting in the pain so bad, and I'm sitting there clicking, you rock your feet back and forth, and I have my cleats on, and it sounded like a bad tap dancer. The nurses come out with a pair of those scissors and cut my laces off and take my shoes away from me. And I said, what? What's the problem? She said, if you do that anymore, I'm going to cut your feet off. I'm like, whatever. Attitude. So, nurses. Nurses will come into play much later. Anyways, I get in there, and I have to wait for, it seems like, forever. Well, that's because my doctor was golfing, and he didn't want to quit until he hit the 18th hole. So he comes strolling in with those bad socks and everything, He says, here, you had a little problem. I said, wow, you're so astute. He said, shut up. I'm like, I can't catch a break today. They get me in there, and they've x-rayed me, everything. He's looking at my arm. He's holding it up. And I said, you going to give me any painkillers? He said, nope. And about that time, he yanked my arm. Said it. Reflex, and that was my left arm. My reflex was to reach up with a clenched fist with my right hand, and I got this poor nurse right in the face, and she staggered back a little bit. Oof. This was the mother of two of my best friends. And I'm like, how am I going to tell my best friends I just punched their mother in the mouth? Thank God, she said, sweetie, don't worry about it. It's not the first time it's happened. So to Billy and Bobby and Danny and Jerry Crow, I'm sorry I hit your mom. It wasn't intentional. So, I played that up to the hilt. Got a lot of sympathy from a lot of girls. I learned that you have to take advantage of the situation you're in at the moment. So that was cool. I went through, and we'll move up to my sophomore year. I played football. It was poor. I was not a great player. I never played football after that. I got tired of all the screaming and the yelling and carrying on. The hitting part was great, but the stuff you had to go through to get to there was, well, it stunk. So I finished up, and later on, in the late fall, I moved down to Delaware with my dad. So that would have been the fall of 1980. Yeah. Man, I loved Delaware. It was flipping awesome. I was 5 minutes away from Rehoboth Beach. I didn't even know a place like that existed, but wow, it was awesome. So I got my driver's license down there. At the age of 15, you could get a permit and get your full license at 16, and I did. And Dad had a four-wheel drive Chevy pickup, and I loved driving it down to the beach, hanging out with all the beach bunnies, and just, man, I had a ball. I worked at a place called Roy Rogers Chicken House. A lot of the older people, they would remember Roy Rogers. Famous TV cowboy. Mm-hmm. Nicest guy you'd ever want to meet. Didn't meet him, but it would have been cool. I was the chicken guy and the roast beef guy, so I was out back. Funny story about this place. Everything was stainless steel. The milkshake maker, the warming oven where you'd put the chicken were in stainless steel trays, so everything's metal. And also the shelves where you'd slide down all the sandwiches and everything. I was leaning against that shelf one day. I opened up the door to the warmer, or it was the milkshake maker. All I know is I was leaning against stainless steel, opening stainless steel, sliding in a stainless steel tray, and for whatever reason, that's the moment that some of the electrical system in Roy Rogers' chicken house, his roast beef house, decided to short. And there I am, just a shaking. And this one kid saw me, and the girls said, "What do we do? What do we do?" He said, "Watch this," and he kicked me. "Oh my God, you kicked him!" Yeah, thanks. He saved my life. Yeah. Because I was starting to turn colors, he said. So, yeah, that was interesting. So, I moved back to New York. It was the summer of '81. And that was when I joined an organization called DMLA. DMLA is basically junior Masons. My dad was a Mason. My mother was an Eastern Star. Mm-hmm. Although that whole weird organizational stuff. I joined because my mother kept pestering me. The guys were kind of weird, but I made good friends, and I found out that, man, you can party. So I spent 2 years or so of my life just cutting loose. I can remember an Easter morning. I came home around 5:30 an Easter morning in my mother's car, loaded up with stereo equipment because we decided we were going to have a party the night before. I ended up dropping 3 girls off to 3 different houses at about 2 or 3 in the morning in that neck of the woods in Elmira, New York. to some very unhappy fathers. Since it was Easter and our Lord's resurrection, they decided to let me live, but I didn't go back to those houses. I was even invited to one. I said, no, this is a trick. He's going to take me out and bury me in the ditch. So I never went back, but it was a good childhood. And in 1983, I graduated high school. Out of a class of, I think, 118, I was around 108th. Because, frankly, I hated school. I hated everything about it. There was no redeeming value. I can remember a few great teachers. There was Tom Hagedorn, who taught algebra. He was an awesome guy. Got me through. There was a Mrs. Ormsby, English. She actually made it fun. She took us to a Shakespeare play. I didn't know who Shakespeare was. He was just a dude. It was like a company who made fishing reels. But I had a good time, and because she made it fun. And I remember Mrs. Hoffman. I was failing this woman's class, and she went the extra distance and made sure that I got some extra credit. She made reading fun. There were a few, but for the most part, I can tell you that in the history class I was in, my junior year, there were close to, as memory serves me, about 137 divots in a particular ceiling tile, because I spent that entire year in history staring at that damn tile and counting the dots. That's how much I got out of high school. But I see by the clock, it's time to wrap this up. I don't want to bore you. I don't want to lose you. I hope you come back for the next show. So I'm going to let you go for now. This is Brian Strawser. It's just Brian. Have a good evening.